a printable copy of the CFP assurances. So they're located here, and I encourage you all to take a look at those and maybe print those out to be a reference guide for yourselves. I wanted to start off with today's presentation with a big thank you to all of you. Believe it or not, I stole this from Jesse, but it holds true for the both of us. We truly do appreciate your flexibility, your patience, your hard work, your honesty, your humor, and your just being there for us. We're in the same boat as you, and we're trying to make the best out of a situation. And as any other thing, nothing goes right. So we're doing the best we can, and we appreciate all of your efforts. So we can't say this enough, and truly, truly, truly appreciate you all. So I kind of jumped the gun and told you what today's session would include. So let's just get into it. So any of you that actually came to my presentation last year saw this slide, and I felt like it was really important to leave in for this year's presentation too. The more that we work with the grants management system and the financial components of that, it is blatantly clear that this application relies on a true and strong relationship between you as a CFP team leader and your business office. So, the last 2 years we've been very deliberate in inviting business managers to participate in these trainings with us, and that's very intentional. So we're hoping that you're all forming that partnership and that continues in the future. So this is just a screenshot of the CFP timeline. In entirety, it's 2 pages long. But it is something that we used to have posted on the website, and we took a hiatus, a year off from it because so many things had changed. And then we realized from the field that you all were asking, like, when can I anticipate this? When does this happen? What does that mean? Why am I getting this, halfway through the year? So what we tried to do is articulate multiple things. When the best case scenarios are deadline-wise for most of our asks. And like any year, of course, best case scenario and what actually occurs don't always align perfectly. It also includes 4 different types of activities. So we have grants management activities, so, asks from us around grants management. Some of the professional development that we offer to you throughout the year, what our deadlines and expectations are around monitoring, and finally, there are a few data requests that you are required to submit to us. So they should all be articulated in the timeline, but it is a living document, so I'm sure that things will change. We'll update unreasonable expectations and deadlines in the document. So foremost, what it is it includes what you can expect, when we expect things to arrive in our desk, but it also is an opportunity for you to know when you can expect things from us. Some examples of those things might be, when amendments are due or when the application goes live, but also when we might get data to you to be able to do your jobs. And most importantly, it's a tool to help you plan for your upcoming year. And we know with all of the asks of the agency and others that it's really important that you can, plan out a year in advance about how your workflow is going to work. And this isn't your only job, and you have to squeeze a lot of things in throughout a 12-month period that you don't have time to do. So we really wanted to get this information to you so that you felt like you could make a plan. It also is an opportunity for you to see how much of this is co-aligned with your business office. So there's a lot of things that will affect your actual application, but it also is vitally important that the business office is submitting some of that documentation in a timely manner so that you can do your jobs. So we hope you enjoy it, and we also hope that you give us feedback about it. And if you don't understand what the ask is, certainly to reach out to us. Are there any questions, Jesse?
Nothing yet, thanks.
Okay, so one of the things that certainly isn't new, but kind of threw people for a loop last year was us upholding what ESSA indicates is required for transfers of funds. So ESSA now allows you to transfer up to 100% of both your Title II and your Title IV allocation, and you can move those into Title I, II, III, IV, and V, with the caveat being that Title III cannot receive a transfer unless it has an allocation. So that hasn't changed. The up to 100% did change in the new law. What also didn't change is the fact that an LEA must request a transfer 30 days prior to making it. So the agency rolled out a method for that. We sent you a form called the intent to transfer request mid-year last year and said, hey, by the way, if you're intending to move money from one funding source to another, that you need to have this document in 30 days prior to submitting that application. So I just want to make sure that everybody's clear with that and understands that that's not a new ask. That is something that's always been in the law, this law, the previous law. It's just we are holding you up to that because it's something that potentially will be fiscally audited on from the feds, and we want to make sure that we're all in compliance with it. I do want to point out, though, that this doesn't apply to consolidating funds. So when you consolidate funds or you pool funds together, like in your SWP, your consolidated admin, or your Replex authority, we do not require the intent to transfer form for any of those. I'm going to pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions about that.
Nothing that's coming yet, Karen.
Maybe we don't have any participants today. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
All right. So the dreaded T&R. So target and ranking, of course, is a challenge for everyone. We understand that. I want to put out a couple of encouraging pieces of information. One, there is new draft guidance from the feds, non-regulatory guidance around T&R. Of course, they never call it target and ranking in the title, so when you go to search for it, it's challenging, so I've hyperlinked it here. I do want to point out that it's draft guidance, so things can change in it. It just went through a comment period, so several months from now, they'll finalize that non-regulatory guidance. But in reviewing it, it is extremely helpful, and it's written in a way that's much easier to understand than the old guidance from 2000 whatever. So I want to point out that that's probably something you should familiarize yourself with. I also want to say at this point, typically we try to go through target and ranking once again for people that have questions. But after yesterday's discussion and so forth, we felt like it was better to let you know that we understand that each of your situations are unique and that we are more than happy to help you with your target and ranking. But we ask that you just reach out with your specific questions, because trying to answer those in this type of forum is just not very helpful. It's very unique to you, and it doesn't mean anything to the next person because their situation is so different. So I'm not trying in any way to downplay this or, indicate that it's not important to us to help you with. It's just this probably isn't the best forum to tackle those types of questions. So really reach out. Christine, myself, Jesse, we're all very well equipped to answer your unique questions about your LEA and available to help you with that. Another thing that I wanted to make crystal clear is at the end of this grant cycle, we afforded you all some additional flexibility around substantially approved and so forth. So I wanted to put out this slide so that you understand that as of July 1st or the new grant cycle, that will go back to period of performance that we had currently had in play. And so what that means for the CFP grant is that your initial submission would have substantial approval as of July 1st, or your submission date, whichever those two dates are later. So really encouraging you to get those applications in as soon as possible so that we can get the approvals done as soon as possible so that you can continue, your activities. And, I'm hearing more and more how essential maybe some summer activities are going to be. So we want to get those applications in and approved as quickly as possible. But I also wanted to put out this slide because it articulates the fact that just because a CFP grant does that, it doesn't mean all the grants that come through the agency do. So it's important that you have conversations with your grants managers and those other programs to understand what their period of performance is. And as always, amendments will not have a substantial approval date, meaning that that grant would need to be fully executed before you obligated any funds. So, if you have any questions about this, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to the fiscal finance folks. You can reach out to the grants managers for any one of the grants that come through the agency. I'm going to pause for a second. Jesse, do we have any questions?
No, more just an observation. It sounds like the link in the presentation may not work to bring you to the fiscal guidance. I'm sorry, to the TNR guidance, but Amber has posted, it looks like now 2 links in the comments that should give you that same document. So if folks are having trouble getting to that document from the PowerPoint, just go ahead and try one of those.
We also will post it on the website if Amber hasn't already done that. I forgot to ask her to do it, so I apologize for that. We'll make sure that that's up there and available to you at the close of the presentation. So one of the things you'll see in the CFP timeline is a lot of mention around monitoring. And so this is just a point of clarification. The CFP team does 2 types of monitoring each year. We do full-blown CFP on-site monitoring of a small number of districts every year. That can range anywhere from 3 to 6. And that's when we look at all areas of CFP. We come and we visit with you all, we visit with some of the schools, we do this whole process. Then the CFP team also does what's called focused monitoring. And so for focused monitoring, a lot of you questioned, why am I getting this? Why am I being monitored on this again? So the focused monitoring is a little bit different. What we do is we try to pick at least 3 topic areas to typically be done as a desk audit. So I say typically because in years past, some of those have been done on site. So I didn't want to close that window for anyone that might want to do those that way in the future. But those are chosen based upon areas that you all have articulated to us that you need technical assistance with, and also those areas that are articulated in the CFP assurances as areas that we need to monitor on a regular basis. So an example of the latter might be comparability. So we might ask you to provide us with your documentation to show comparability. So just so you know, monitoring is nothing new. It's something that we do every year, and you may or may not be selected for both of these. So it's kind of, the luck of the draw. The CFP on-site monitoring is done by a risk assessment. Unfortunately, if you're high on the risk assessment, you're probably high on fiscal finances risk assessment. You might be high on other grants risk assessments, so you might get multiple visits from multiple teams at the agency. And then focused monitoring just depends on if that topic happens to fit your type of grant. So a good example might be those who are selected for PFE monitoring because they had an allocation over $500,000, or those selected for targeted assistance monitoring because they had targeted assistance schools. So it's kind of random in who gets selected for the focused monitoring because it's all based upon what the topic area is. But as far as notifications, the timeline does give you a lot of this, but in general, in December, we'll tell you if you're selected for an on-site monitoring, and those are conducted typically January, February, March, because we want to wrap those up by the end of the school year. And then focused monitoring we try to do earlier in the year to afford opportunity for folks to get to it, of course. So we typically will notify you in September, but it could be later depending on the topic area. So I just wanted to give some clarification around that. I also wanted to point out that CFP on-site monitoring is not fiscal monitoring. So those are two separate things. Generally, CFP monitoring is a programmatic monitoring, and fiscal monitoring might look at CFP, but it's a fiscal monitoring. So that confuses folks a lot too when they get notification that we're both coming on different dates and so forth. It's really meant to be two different types of monitoring. The agency, for everything other than child nutrition, fiscally monitors separately from programmatic monitoring. So just a point of clarification. Any questions, Jesse?
Nope, it's looking good. Thanks.
All right. So another area where we see folks maybe not understanding what we're asking for, or committing to everything that's in there, is the CFP assurances. So one of the things that we did this year was make that into a printable form so that you can actually take it to administrators around your LEA and have some type of sign off on that. So in the timeline, we set a date of September, but that's flexible. That's, probably, more like a best case scenario. What we're looking for, though, is when you receive these funds, you're signing off on 14 pages of assurances. And oftentimes folks, kind of flip through them, but they're not really, understanding what the ask is. So we're asking you to make sure that you distribute a copy of these to all the administrators in the LEA, and that you remember that it's your responsibility to know what you've committed to in these assurances. So your superintendent is signing off on them, but you're kind of the one that's charged with making sure that it's all documented. And leads me to the third bullet, of course. Make sure that you keep all the documentation that relates to these assurances, because we're going to ask for them for particular monitorings. So it's really important that you have those readily accessible, and that you in your districts figure out who's responsible for what and where it's located. And if there's anything in the assurances that you're unclear as to what the ask is, please reach out. They come from the law, and so sometimes they're written in a way that the ask isn't crystal clear. So, anything that's in there that's questionable as to what we might ask you for, please reach out, and we'll probably try to start doing some technical assistance around the more nitty-gritties of these. Katie Preston, I don't know how many of you participated, but gave a presentation on PFE, parent and family engagement, because that's a big part of the assurances, and there's a lot that you're required to do as recipients of Title I funds. So just want to make sure that you're aware that that exists, and that you're reviewing those and keeping the appropriate documentation to ensure compliance with those. All right. So let's talk a little bit about writing and budgeting for investments. So we're just going to look at some of the areas in which, let me start off with saying, we don't want to receive your application 500 times. You don't want to receive it back 500 times. We'd like to make these as quick turnarounds as possible. And remember, you might have 50, 90 investments, but there's 54 of you. So, if you do the math, we're looking at thousands and thousands of investments and budget line details for all of these applications. And so it's really easy for something to, pass by. So we're just going to go over some of the common application errors and needs and why we send it back so many times, in hopes that we can try to eliminate some of the back and forth, which I know that you guys would greatly appreciate as much as we do. So some of the common application areas that we find that need more information have to do with investment purposes are not supported by data. So you'll get back the application and it'll say this isn't articulated in your SIP, this doesn't have data to support it. So this year they rolled out not the new SIP, but the SIP and the data tools to help eliminate some of that back and forth around that. Investment descriptions have too few details to determine reasonableness. So, we want to take a little bit of not credit, but understanding that you might have felt like this was maybe a mixed message for a while. So when we told you to stop putting things in the investment because it was making them potentially not, you were putting yourself at fiscal risk by listing too much information and not putting cost objectives, it had to do with protecting you so that things wouldn't come back as non-allowable expenditures. But we still need information like the number of teachers that are going to be trained, the number of days the training is going to occur. So, it's not one extreme or the other. You do need to put in those details, and oftentimes you'll get back an application because it just didn't articulate enough of that to make it for us to make a determination about reasonableness. We talked a little bit about this in yesterday's presentation, but I just want to bring it up again. The minimum budgeting. So the first chart on the target and ranking on step 4 talks about, parental set aside, homeless set aside, all of those different things. Remember, your allocation is a constantly moving target. So we're adding money throughout the year. And every time you open an amendment, you need to check in with the target and ranking step 4 to ensure that all of those minimum budgeting or set aside requirements are being met. And for instance, if your allocation reaches a certain point, it might trip something that wasn't previously there. So it's vitally important that you look at those every time you submit an application, even if you're changing something that has nothing to do with Title I. So another one is budget details are incorrect. So if you participated in yesterday's presentation, you saw that we added the business manager as a must be notified at the top of the application. This is because we're reaching out to you guys and asking that you please review the budget details before they're submitted, because many folks fill out the application and have what seems like the right answer in the budget details, only to find out that it's not the way the budget is set up in the individual districts. So it's really important that you team with your business managers to make sure that those things are correct from the onset. This is another one, and I think it's the way the application is laid out. When you receive feedback from us, there's 3 tabs, and frequently people don't look at all 3 tabs, I think, or they get fixated on one issue and they don't read down below. But we send a lot of applications back and forth because we've told you to, we've asked you to fix 3 things and you only fix 1, or you don't fix anything with the budget details, but you fix the programmatic. So make sure you recognize that there are 3 tabs out there. The first one is usually blank, but the second 2 are most likely going to have information that we need you to address. All right, so talking a little bit about investment descriptions. So these are the actual investments that you write in the main part of the application. I'm not talking about the budget details right now. They must include data-aligned statements of purpose. So if you can't connect it to a data source as to the need, you can't ask for it. They must include specific activities and strategies. It can't be vague. It has to say exactly what you intend to do with the money. You can't, we ask that you not include cost categories here. That's what the budget is for. So it used to be when someone would write an investment, they would then finish the investment with include salary, benefits, travel, materials. We're going to know that information because as of this GMS system, we have a budget that directly aligns to the investment. So the investment description is not the place for this. The budget line items would be what supports this. And once again, we need investment descriptions that are specific enough to make sure that it aligns to the appropriateness of the budget line items. So if you're writing an investment that includes salary, benefits, travel, and materials, whatever you write as the investment should clearly align to those line items. In the budget details, so on the budget side, we need you to be mindful of not writing your actual investment in the descriptor. And what I mean by that is a lot of people will take what they write in the investment, which is very lengthy, and they'll kind of cut and paste that over in the budget. That is not what you need to do. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it could potentially make it a disallowed cost. So you need to be very specific in each of the budget line items, what exactly that one line item is for. So an example would be registration fee or salary or benefits, not, the full-blown description of what you wrote in your investment. Each of those has to be separate and aligned to the investment in total, but they're, they are very specific to the object code. So a lot of times you're kind of repeating what's in the first column, which is that object code descriptor. We ask that, once again, that you collaborate with your business office when writing the budget details to make sure that you've addressed everything, that you have the right amounts in there, that the function codes are correct. We do not look at function codes, meaning the CFP team. We rely on you to work with your business manager to ensure that those are correct. And when you have questions around those, that you go specifically to your business manager, who then, if they have questions, will reach out to Sean Cousineau or Bob Cuthrop for clarification around any of those. And then also in the budget details, please include benefits for any investment that has a salary or stipend. So this last year you've done much, much, much better around this, but we still see a few here and there. So we wanted to make sure to remind you all of that. Things we do not want to see in the budget details. So do not do these things, please. Don't cut and paste your investment description into your budget details because it's going to allow, it's going to potentially have disallowed costs if you do that. Don't group your costs together under one object code. Salary is one object code, benefits is one object code. They can't go together. Please do not use the object code 730 for supplies that have a unit value of less than 5,000. So a good example would be you're purchasing a laptop. That laptop is worth $1,000. It's not a supply. It's not a 730. It's a 600. So, you need to make sure that the unit value for any one of those items is how you code it. And just a reminder, this was a big change 2 years ago. You've started doing an exceptional job with this, but we don't want to see a object code 100 for salaries have two separate line items, one for retirement and one for other benefits. It just should be one benefit line that incorporates that retirement in under the 200 line item. I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's any questions.
None so far, Karen. You're doing a great job.
I'm not sure there's anybody listening to us.
Oh, wait. Ooh, boy, one just
Ooh,
snuck in. All right.
all right.
So the question is, and I'll just give it to you.
Okay.
Will the initial allocations, specifically the 1, 2, and 4, be 90% of FY21 allocations as they have in a couple of past years?
Good question. So the answer to that as of today is no. We will give you an initial allocation based upon the information that we received back a month or so ago. So no 90%. But I do want to say that those allocations change constantly. And so the final number, is never the final number. It could be changed multiple times throughout the year.
And one more, Karen. Do we know the percent for retirement this year?
Oh, that's a great question. I do not have the memo. That's not a good plan. Is Bob on the call? Okay. So here's what I'll do. That memo comes in through upstairs and no one has shared it with me, but as soon as I receive it, I'll reach out to Fiscal today and get it posted or
Karen?
Yes.
I haven't received the memo yet from the retirement, but I'll send out an email, see if I can get it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, we should have gotten it by now, I would think, but everybody's in the same boat, I suppose. So that was Bob. He's gonna make sure that we get a copy of it, and we'll notify everybody of the current year's percentage. Good question. Yep. Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Bob. I am seeing in the comments 19% potentially, and that maybe a letter came out in November. We'll confirm that, and we'll get word out to you guys.
Yeah, we'll just need to clarify that because it can make a big difference, and it keeps inching up. Ooh, yeah, 19%.
And thank you for chiming in, folks who have some knowledge of that already. We appreciate the help for sure.
All right. Anything else right now, Jesse?
I'm not seeing anything else. Just more comments in the comment section that folks have their hands on the letter and they're confirming that 19%. So we really appreciate it.
All right. Well, maybe they should send it to us so we be in the know too. It was probably mailed to our office and there's no one to open our mail. I don't know. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the 35% flexibility. So this came up yesterday and folks were wanting a clearer explanation. I don't know how clear I'll be, but I'll try. So back in FY19, the agency changed the way that it does the 10% rule to the 35% rule based upon the new grants management system. And that was discussed again this year of potentially changing again, but the end result is that we will continue with the 35% flexibility again for FY21. The difference between the 10 and the 35% is the 35% is applied to the object level roll up for each grant award. So it's not the total grant. It's not, it's the object level roll up. So this 35% flexibility, it cannot, you can't overspend your entire grant. This doesn't give you the ability to spend 135% of your grant. If you take this flexibility to one object code, you then need to underspend in another to make up the difference. But what's most important about this is if you change the what, you're required to do the amendment. You cannot use the 35% flexibility. And then that last bullet, we probably should say one more time, you can never exceed the total grant award. So I'm going to give a couple examples because it might play out easier using the examples. So the first example is you have a grant award and it's approved, and in it is a 0.5 FTE teacher at a cost of a $35,000 salary and $8,000 for benefits. So when you budget, the LEA used a single person health plan to estimate that cost. but the person hired ended up being on a family plan. So that cost increased to $10,000. The increase is under the 35% of the object roll-up code for the same WUD, which is the 0.5 FTE teacher. So would this be allowable use of the 35% flexibility? And since you're not here to answer me, we are going to say, yes, this is an allowable use. You didn't change anything. It's still the same one, half-time teacher. It's just that you did not know that they had a health plan benefits for a family rather than a single person. So nothing changed as far as the what. So this would be an allowable use of that. The next example is you have a grant award budgeted. It's approved to send 2 teachers to a PD conference. And the estimate for that is about $1,000 for a total of $2,000. After spending of the grant award has under budgeted amounts resulting in available grant dollars. So, you didn't spend another area. So you decide that you want to send 10 teachers and increase that cost to $10,000. So is this an allowable use of the 35%? No, and not because the amount exceeds the 35%, but it's because you've changed the what. Sending 2 teachers to a PD is very different than sending 10 teachers to a PD. So that what has changed so that you cannot use that 35% flexibility. So it was kind of a brief example. I'm not sure if that helps or not. So I'm going to ask, does anyone have questions around the 35% flexibility rule?
I'm not seeing anything coming in yet, Karen.
All right, well, we'll move on. And if people are typing away, we can always go back to them. That's not a problem. Okay, subgrants. So many of you are still doing subgrants to your member districts. Some of you can't anymore because you're all one district. But I just wanted to point out a few things so that when you're audited, you don't potentially have disallowed costs. This is when the grant is received at the SU level, but the obligations are incurred at the district level. So, your member districts are actually writing out the checks. I want to point out that you are required to have an official document signed by both the superintendent and the principal agreeing to this. And most importantly, for grants management, we currently have the correct codes in the system. So last year, we instructed you to subgrant to object code 800, function code 5500. 5500 is actually the roll-up for that. And so this year, that correction was made so that 5510 and 5520 have both been loaded into the application. So for CFP, you would only use 5510, but that's an important factor to remember this year to make sure that those function codes are all lined up.
So Karen, if I can pull you back to the 35% rule quickly.
Yes.
A couple of questions. The first one is about your second example. The question is that if we changed to 10 participants but did not go over 35%, would that be allowable?
No, because you changed the what still.
Right.
So if you're having, I'm sorry. So that example is tricky because it's about 2 different things. You've changed the what and you've exceeded the 35%, but overall the what is the higher factor in that.
Right. So, and the second question, it says, in practical terms, the 35% rule is very difficult to track and manage, especially if you have many investments with budget lines in the same object code. Any suggestions?
Well, so it's a roll-up of those. So you're looking at your total object code roll-up for 100 or 200. So I guess I need more information to determine what part is challenging and how to assist you.
Yep. So maybe an email. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. All right.
It might be important information for everybody on the call, but I can't help you because I'm not understanding which part of it's difficult and what you would need help with. So just so you know, this is a constant conversation amongst the grants management system. So we may not stick with 35% flexibility in the future, but it is the way it's going to be for 21. So we have heard from business folks throughout the state that this is not, they'd like it to go back to the way it was. So those conversations are occurring, and we'll keep you apprised of what if anything will change for the the next fiscal year.
One last question that's come in, Karen. Can you give an example of how this plays out in the budget sections with the combined object code cost?
Well, it wouldn't. You would just account for it yourself. So you would leave the application. You would potentially spend, additional funds, and you would account for that in your records and say, we used 35% flexibility and we increased our 200 line item, and then we decreased our unused 600 line item to make up for it. Then when you do an amendment, you actually make the change. But I would, if the question is around, you don't make the initial change in the application, you just do it in your accounting records that you use the 35% flexibility, and this is where you used it, and this is where you, took it away from so that you didn't incur overspending.
All right, and then one more, Karen. Let me just see here. Oops, I've lost it. Give me 1 second, gang. Says, can you swap funds between object codes if you don't change the what and don't exceed 35%?
Can you swap? Can you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, it says, can you swap funds between object codes if you don't change the what and don't exceed 35% up or down?
Well, give me an example, because I'm just going to flat out say no, because I can't picture what the ask is. Can you change? I mean, you'd either instill the 35% flexibility or you wouldn't. I mean, I'm not understand. You can't just, if your grant is approved to do an activity, you can't just willy-nilly change things. So what are you changing that isn't a change of the what?
So it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like this person is willing to do a call or an email. It's a large, complicated application, and so I think one-on-one conversation would be great.
Okay, sorry, caller. I didn't mean to push you off. It's just there's not enough information for me to be able to answer that. I'm sorry. Whoops,
Thanks,
I'm
Karen.
going the wrong way.
Uh-oh.
Whoopsie whoops. All right. Just want to reiterate the administration caps for Title I funds. So Bob has told me that many of you have applied for indirect rates this year, which is good because you're entitled to those funds. But the administrative caps in the law around the titles, you need to be aware that a lot of CFP team leaders will call me and say, my business manager wants the indirects. How do I do that? And that's fine. But if you're taking direct administration on from any of the titles, it's a combination. The cap is a combination of both of those. So frequently you can't take all of that you're entitled to for indirects because you've already taken as direct administration. So just wanted to let you know that it includes both. And once again, the cap for the titles, Title I and Title II is a 10%, and Titles 3, 4, and 5 are that 2%. So, when you're planning on getting your application in right now, just remember that exists, and that it might prohibit you from asking for every bit of money that the system is kind of indicating that you're eligible for. Also want to mention that Con Admin, all the budget line items must be coded to the function code 2495, which is administration of grants. And then also that the agency had to make up these false object and function codes to allow for the transfer of monies to go into the school-wide and the consolidated admin. So on your budget, consolidated admin would actually code to 9995. So you all did it right last year, so I don't anticipate it being an issue, but more so I just wanted you to remember that those administration caps are for both indirect and direct administration costs.
So Karen, quick question.
Yep.
We have not taken indirects previously. How do we apply to take it this year?
Well, I think your ship has sailed for this year if you did not get an indirect application into Bob by the deadline. Just to note that the actual indirect submission is on the CFP timeline so that you won't forget next year. I'll let Bob chime in if he would allow for an application at this late date, but I'm guessing not. I think the due date was March 13th, and the approved letters are going out. So I think the ship has sailed. Is that true, Bob? All right, well, we might have lost Bob, so we'll just come back to that. So typically
That's true, Karen.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. So you need to make sure that you're applying for it and that it's in Bob's hands, mid-March, early March. So I don't think you can apply for it at this time, but you could apply for next year.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Yep.
All right. So a little bit more on indirects in the amendment. So this happens frequently, and I don't want anyone to get caught being paid on a derived rate because they didn't do this. So every time you open an amendment, if you're asking for indirects, you need to go into each of those budgets and make sure that you've asked for the maximum if you have, one, the money, and two, haven't exceeded the caps, because a lot of you aren't remembering to do that. So your allowable amount of indirect will change as you write more and more investments. And so it's important that you remember each time to go in and up that amount if you have it available, to ensure that you're getting the most, you're getting the non-derived rate of indirects. So this wasn't a huge problem last year that we heard, but it was certainly a problem the year before. It's when you write the investment, you're not sure that the person that you're going to employ is going to be a contractor or an employee. And because you code those completely differently in the system, coding it one way and hiring it the opposite way would be a disallowed cost that would require an amendment. So just wanted to point out, if that person is on your payroll, they're going to be coded as a 100. And if they're a contractor with a contract, they're going to be coded as 300. So some of the things that folks have suggested to eliminate that was, one, we would get your amendment approved immediately to not cause this to be disallowed costs for you. But we all know that that's not generally is in control as we'd like it to be. So one of the things that you could do to prevent this is, if you had the money, you could code it both ways so that it had that substantial approval from the onset. But I don't know if this is an actual issue for many of you, but I just wanted to point out that this would definitely be a changing of the what, and would be a disallowed cost if it weren't hired the same way as the application reads. So I don't want you to get into a situation where you're, obligating funds that are then going to be disallowed. So this is the same thing as when you have supplies or a line item, an object that isn't valued at $5,000 or more coded to 730. And so we're not, the very first year of the grants management system, we were a little bit flexible in allowing these things to be changed, and that's not the case anymore. So how it's coded in the system is is the way it is until an amendment's done. So I just don't want you to get caught off guard about any of that. This is an awkward slide, but it's important. I want to let you know that there's many parts of the application and the process and the system that your LEA is in control of. So what I mean by that is you're in control of the census data. You and your data teams are submitting that information to us for the October count. That in turn drives your FRLs and your enrollment in the application. So if that information is delayed or incorrect, there's not a whole lot the agency can do about that. So it's very, very, very important that you have a relationship with those folks and that you look at that data before it's submitted for the October 1 census count or the DC6 submission prior to prior to the submission, because after the fact, it's the agency is finding it more and more and more challenging to be able to reopen those submissions for corrections. The same holds true for instance, in Title I specifically, we ask, so now you can claim reimbursement whenever it suits you, as opposed to on a quarterly basis. There is one AOE, however, that is required for Title I, and that's the through September 30, so the July 1 through September 30. And it's vitally important that that one gets in on time. The reason being is we can't do Title I carryover for anybody without having those submitted, and then we can't do the 15 limit letters because of that. So it's another example of where you're in complete charge of when you're going to receive your carryover funds, and that's when the business office submits those required documents. So want to make sure that you have that relationship with your business office and that you're working together to get those reports in. Another example of that is with amendments. So it used to be that you had to call us or email us and ask for an amendment to be opened. You're in complete control of that now. You can amend your grant as soon as you receive your grant award notification on your original submission. So there's lots and lots of places and parts in both the application and in our systems that the LEA is in control of, and we're here to support you with that. But I just want to make sure that you're in the driver's seat with a lot of these, so they're important to stay on top of. I just want to finish out today's presentation, whoops, sorry about that, with who you should contact. And as you all know, I love speaking with all of you when I'm not in a grumpy mood, and appreciate you reaching out to me. But sometimes I'm not the best person to reach out to because I'm not the expert in that particular area. So I'm not trying to encourage you guys not to reach out to me, but I'm trying to encourage you to reach out to the person who's going to have the most up-to-date and best information about your situation so that I don't give you erroneous information. So in the CFP team, these are the actual application contexts. Let me just say that sometimes these titles don't actually represent what these folks do. Jesse probably is reviewing your budget from head to toe, so he's the person that's probably giving you feedback around those. And then Christine, of course, is giving you Title I feedback, Megan's giving you Title II, Jim's giving you 3, and Katie's giving you Title IV feedback. Feel free to reach right out to them if it's feedback around that title, because they're the one that wrote it. Now you can reach out to me and I can go tap them on the shoulder, but they're the ones that are going to answer the question. I, on the other hand, anything to do with your grant, I can't get it to work, that type of thing, happy to help. I also wanted to put out there that there's a fiscal and a finance monitoring team that deals with a lot of the budget side of things. So some examples, payments, reimbursements, those types of things. That's John Liu. Bob and Abby are the duo upstairs that deal with all things fiscal monitoring and fiscal related. So Bob's going to give a presentation tomorrow around SWP accounting and those types of things. You know, I think I know answers to that, but I'm probably not giving you the right answer. So reach right out to Bob. He's a great resource. Also, we get a lot of questions around the SIP and, you know, the data inventories. There is a wonderful team of education quality assurance folks that are assigned to that work that will give you much better information than we will, because that's what they do. So Josh heads that team, and then Marianne, Jen, Kevin, and Tony all work with individual LEAs around submission on those things. So reach right out to them. They're more than happy to take your call and answer your questions.
Hey, Karen.
And yes.
Sorry, let me just jump right in on that slide. Sorry to interrupt. So absolutely the EQ team, for any questions about your continuous improvement plans, your SIPs. The data inventory is sort of a joint venture. It is serving both the continuous improvement plans, but also serving our application, as you've all heard several times over the last month or two. So we'll share data inventory questions. If you have data inventory questions as they pertain to your CFP application, definitely reach out to me. Josh's team can help as well, but we're sharing ownership of that. If it's about uploading, that upload does exist in the continuous improvement planning section of your GMS, so they might be more helpful in that regard.
Thank you for that clarification. Sorry about the confusion. And then most importantly, many of you will reach out and say, so-and-so doesn't have access to this. I need them to have access to this. That's definitely a help desk question. So, you know, I can forward it on, but I just wanted you to be aware that the help desk is amazing and very helpful. And if they have something they can't answer, they do contact us. So, you know, we're working in collaboration with them. So this is in no means meant to off-put any of you or tell none of you to contact me. It's just I wanted you to make sure that we're aware that there was all of these other wonderful individuals in the agency that are happy to help you through whatever it is your questions pertain to. All right, so are there any, before we close for the day, is there any other questions that anyone would like to ask at this time?
So we've got some thank yous. We've got some more questions about indirect rates that Bob has graciously stepped in to answer. And thank you so much, Bob, for your support throughout. Got a question. Are we currently available by phone?
Well, let me change to my next slide.
There you go.
So our phones at work, no. But I have provided you all with my cell phone number. That is my personal cell phone, so I'd prefer you not call me at midnight, but I am happy to take your calls by cell phone because a lot of the issues that you call me about or contact me about really have to be one-to-one conversations. So I know I provided all those work numbers for everyone. I think the best way to reach out to any other members of the team is through email. But I have shared my cell phone number because I'm comfortable with that.
Thanks, Karen. That looks like it for questions.
All right. So, you know, email me, call me. It doesn't matter. If something wasn't clear today, feel free to reach out. I know we kind of rushed through some things. And like, once again, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate all of you and miss speaking with you. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.